Once in a small village nestled between the lush hills and flowing rivers of Africa, there lived a man named Kwame. He was a proud and humble farmer, known for his strength and wisdom. Kwame had a heart full of love, especially for his wife, Amina, and their only son, Lori. Amina was his rock, the woman who had stood by him through thick and thin. Her laughter filled their humble home, and her hands, though worn by work, were the softest and most comforting touch he knew. Lori, their son, was a spirited boy with an inquisitive mind. At just 10 years old, he was the apple of Kwame's eye. Life in the village was simple, but it was a life they cherished. The sun rose and set in a predictable direction, and each day brought its own struggles and joys. But one day, everything changed. It happened so suddenly, without warning, as life often does. Amina, the love of his life, fell sick. At first, it seemed like nothing more than a fever, a common affliction in the village. Kwame, ever the protector, cared for her tenderly, keeping vigil by her side as the fever worsened. She grew weaker with each passing day, her once radiant face now pale and hollow. She couldn't even speak, her lips barely moving, her eyes staring far away, as if lost in some world of pain. Despite every herb, every prayer, every whispered plea to the ancestors, Amina's life faded away, and one quiet evening she took her last breath in Kwame's arms. His world crumbled. Lori, too, mourned his mother, but his pain was different from his father's. He didn't fully understand why she was gone, but felt it. The emptiness that lingered in the corners of their home. The grief was unbearable for Kwame. His heart felt as though it had been torn out, leaving only an aching, hollow space. Days blurred into nights, and he worked tirelessly on the farm, hoping that through labor he could numb the pain. But nothing seemed to heal him, not even his son's innocent laughter or the memory of Amina's smile. Years passed, and though the wound in Kwame's heart never truly healed, he continued on. He raised Lori, teaching him everything he knew: how to plant crops, how to hunt, how to live with the land. But life in the village, with all the beauty, remained a reminder of Amina's absence. Kwame could never escape the haunting memories of her. Then, one day, an invitation arrived. A gathering was to be held by distant relatives in the heart of the land, a celebration of life and family, meant to bring people together after years of separation. Kwame debated for days, unsure whether he was ready to be surrounded by people or to step away from the quiet solitude of his life. But Lori, excited at the prospect of seeing extended family and meeting other children, begged his father to go. And so, despite his hesitations, Kwame agreed. They packed their belongings and traveled, leaving behind the hills and rivers that had known their sorrow. The journey was long, and the roads winding. They passed through villages, meeting strangers and acquaintances who waved from the sides. By the time they reached the gathering, Kwame felt a sense of unease. He wasn't sure why, but the air felt thick, as if the very earth beneath him was holding its breath. Still, he pushed it aside, for Lori's excitement was contagious. The gathering was a lively affair. Distant relatives, friends and neighbors all mingled, laughing and cracking jokes. The smell of roasted meats and spices wafted through the air, and the sound of drums echoed into the sky. Kwame and Lori joined the festivities, though Kwame couldn't shake the feeling that something was not quite right. The feast began, and they were served plates of food, each bite more delicious than the last. The atmosphere was intoxicating, the music and laughter a stark contrast to the emptiness he had long lived for. He ate and drank, a small moment of peace in his otherwise tumultuous life. But it wasn't long before the first signs of trouble began. It started as a slight discomfort in his stomach. a dull ache that seemed to grow with each passing minute. Kwame tried to ignore it, attributing it to the unfamiliar food, but it soon became unbearable. His skin grew clammy, and his vision blurred. Laurie began to look at his father with concern, noticing the paleness that had overtaken him. Kwame stumbled to a quiet corner, seeking relief, but the pain only intensified. It was as though something was inside him, tearing at his insides, feeding on him. His body grew weak, and his pulse raced erratically. He collapsed to the ground, gasping for air. The distant relatives and friends gathered around him in confusion, offering their help. But it was too late. His blood ran cold, and his mind raced as he realized what was happening. He could feel something unnatural inside him, burrowing deeper with every passing second. It was a parasite, born from the food he had consumed, a creature of darkness, feeding off his very essence. His skin began to break out in sores, and his breath became shallow. Laurie screamed, his small hands grasping at his father's arm, but Kwame could barely respond. His vision flickered, and the world around him faded into darkness. In his final moments, he thought of Amina. He thought of the life they had built together, the love that had sustained him even after her death. And in those last fleeting moments, as the parasite feasted on his blood, he wondered if she had known somehow that his time had come. The gathered family members stood around him helpless, unsure of what had happened. Whispers spread like wildfire through the crowd, but none could truly comprehend the horrors of what had taken place. Kwame's body, drained of life, lay still in the dirt. And with him, the last remnants of a love that had once been. Laurie was left standing, trembling, his heart breaking. He didn't understand it all, but he knew one thing: his father, his hero, was gone. And as the sky darkened and the drums fell silent, he was left to carry the weight of the loss, a heavy burden for a young soul. The gathering that was meant to bring family together ended in tragedy. And for Kwame, it was a tragic end to life that had been filled with so much promise, love, and loss. The village would remember him and the story of his death, and the parasite that claimed his life would be whispered for generations. A story of how even the most peaceful lives could be torn apart by the shadows that sometimes lurk just beneath the surface.